Welcome to another Lombardi Live. My very special guest today has an amazing story to tell. Being Drum Channel, we of course know him as a great drummer, playing with Cher, Pink, and so many more. That alone would be a successful career for anybody. But he's also a producer, composer, engineer, author, and keynote speaker, which is something you might not know about him, and you're going to find out a lot more about that. Thank you for joining me today, Mark Schulman.
What's up, my dear old friend Don? Don, you realize I've known you since I was 17 years old?
Wow.
Way back in the Freddie Gruber days.
Well, your career and your life really is amazing. You know, I often say to people here on Drum Channel, lessons can come in many ways. There's traditional drum lessons, and then there's life's drum lessons also, which is something that you've made a great part of your life, and your career is such a great example in that area, which is something I really want to get into. First, I got to ask you this question, because it happens a lot with young drummers here on Drum Channel. What do you think would be the main thing in your career as a drummer that prepared you for taking advantage of the many opportunities you've had and being so successful at them?
You know, I've thought about this a lot, and what I found for myself, certainly, the most important thing is one's attitude. It's very simple. It's so simple, and people don't even realize this. You know, so much of the time we cannot control what happens to us, but at any point in time, you have the power to change, control, or shift your attitude about what is happening to you. And what makes your attitude so profound, and I know this sounds so simple, but you have the power to shift your attitude at any point in time. And your attitude is actually what drives your behavior. And think about the power and leverage in that. So by shifting your attitude, you're changing your behavior to something more that's going to serve you more. And one attitude can drive many behaviors, and your behavior is what determines the consequences or the outcomes of your life. So by shifting your attitude, you're changing the outcomes of your life. And it's such a simple formula. It's A times B equals C. Attitude times behavior equals consequence. Now, I live my life by this. This is the foundation of everything that I do. It's actually the topic of my next book, which is the attitude equation.
Did you have to audition for Pink or Cher? Were you concerned about that? Did you sit down ahead of time and just say, hey, this is going to happen if it's going to happen?
Well, let me start by saying that your attitude begins the moment you sit on that thing you're sitting on. And as drummers, we call it the throne. So I've always taken it as a position of honor that I get to sit down on the throne, man. I feel like the king. And so whether I'm sitting down to practice like technical elements or grooves, I get to do this as opposed to I have to do that. That's one of my attitude selections is I get to be here. And that changes the way I approach practice. So believe it or not, I auditioned for Cher 3 different times. It's an amazing story. I auditioned for Cher the first time in 1992, and I got the freaking gig. I was there. They let all the other drummers go. We were auditioning bass players. And for some reason, the original drummer, somebody in the band, I don't know, for some reason didn't want him there. I can't explain it. Ron Wixow, fantastic drummer who ended up replacing me in Foreigner. So Ron showed up hearing that they were auditioning other drummers. And when he showed up, Cher looked at him and said, oh, Ronnie, and they all had a little huddle. And all of a sudden they walked over to me and said, well, thanks, Mark, you can go now. I'm like, but I thought So a few years later, I got called again to audition. 25 drummers, I made it to the top 4. And Cher couldn't decide. She was going to the auditions back then. She chose the most compatible drummer with her astrological sign. That ended up being a bloke by the name of Brian Hitt, who's been playing with REO forever. Brian's a great guy. And then they let Brian go. There was some weird scuffle, and they let Brian go. So finally, I auditioned for the 3rd time. And then I finally got the gig, and then I had the gig for about 17 or 18 years on and off. And I only left that gig because I started playing with Pink, and I was brought into the Pink gig without auditioning because Pink's manager, Roger Davies, also managed Cher. And he brought me into the Pink gig when Pink's existing drummer couldn't do a couple of gigs. So I subbed for 2 weeks. And again, it was an attitude thing. At the end of the 2 weeks, she decided to hire me permanently. So I ended up playing with Pink for 15 years.
Well, on the 3rd edition with Cher, did you say, here I am again? Do you remember
Well,
me?
you know what? By the third audition, I realized, as I said earlier, I cannot control what happens to me, but I can always control my attitude. My attitude is I'm going to have the best time I possibly can. I was so free to get the gig. I was so free not to get the gig. I just decided I'm going to come in and show up. And I had a specific attitude of not only having the best time for myself, but I realized these poor sods. I was like the 8th out of 9 drummers they were auditioning. The last thing in the world they wanted to hear was, if I could turn back time, and do you believe in life after love? So I just thought, I'm just going to crack these guys up. I'm going to present the most fun person I could be so they could have some fun, so they could have some relief, because I'm sure they're all thinking, oh man, another damn drummer. Because let's face it, playing for Cher is not brain surgery. Everybody that was coming in could play really well. It was just the nuances of your personality and your character and your attitude that would make the difference. So I thought, the more fun I have, the more fun everybody else is going to have. And I'll never forget, at the end of that audition, Paul Merkovich, who's a dear friend of mine, he's the musical director for The Voice. He MD'd Pink. We were on the road with Cher. He said, hey, Mark, just play any groove you want. We'll just jam along with you. And I could tell these guys, their eyes were just glazed over. They were like, oh, man, we've been doing this for hours. And I said, whatever I want to play. What do you want to play, man? You guys have been here for hours. I threw it right back to them. And Sam Sims was playing bass at the time, and I could just see this big old grin. And he starts playing. Remember School Days by Stanley Clarke? He was just waiting to break out on that. So he broke out on that, and I just like, blah, and I started playing with all this intensity. And all of a sudden, for the first time in the entire audition, I could see everybody start to smile. They were having fun. And I knew it at that point, man. I got them because I put it out there that everybody's just going to have the best time possible, and threw it back to them to have fun as opposed to what I wanted. It was all about what they want, which is another lesson everybody can learn because, as a band member, everybody wants to talk, right? If you're the person that listens and you're the person that's really attentive to the needs of others, I look at my life as constantly being of service, on stage, off stage. When I'm on stage, I want to be of service to everybody. So if you throw it back to them, like, how can I be of service to you? Make your life easier as opposed to being so self-absorbed in your paranormals and whatever diddles and everything you're going to do. Really listen, really be present, really be mindful for everybody else. They get that. And those are the kind of people that want to play in a band with you. Who do you want to play in a band with? You want to play in a band with someone who's going to give you love, who's going to give you attention, who's going to really be present for you. So I try to be that guy for everybody, whether I'm playing in a band or giving a speech or hanging out with my daughter. I try to be really present.
You listen
really
out there.
for them.
I often say some of the best lessons on Drum Channel come from what we call our entertainment shows, our interviews, because this is real life, and I think you brought up something else. No matter how good you play, on some occasions, you might not have the astrological sign that's going to get you the gig, and you can't have any control over that.
Can't control that, right? You can only control what you can control. You can control your attitude. That's why I say it starts with attitude.
No question. I love that. And looking at your younger days, just as your drumming career, what do you think when you had that opportunity, when you went in for the audition? You had the attitude. Obviously, you had the skills. You knew how to play the drums. You knew what you were going to play. And you, most importantly, knew why you were going to play it, and then how you would present yourself differently from all those other drummers, which is, the great insight that you're giving us here. But what do you think prepared you the most as a drummer to take advantage of those opportunities? Your time, your feel, your technique?
Because I paid a lot of attention. In my first book's called Conquering Life's Stage Fright, and that's based on the 3 C's, which is clarity, capability, and confidence. You need to have a really clear goal about what you're doing, real clear intention. Every single time you sit down to practice, the more clarity you have about what you're going to practice, that leads you to develop the capability, that leads you to understand exactly what you need to practice to be able to get there, which creates real, absolute confidence. Because if you get on stage, my mantra is always, I want to be over prepared. Because if I'm completely capable, then I know I will have confidence, even in the wake of being nervous, even in the wake of unexpected circumstances. Your capability always shines through because you've done the work. And I think that that's one of the secrets of all the great drummers is they are truly, truly capable. So they have that absolute confidence, even in unpredictable situations. And it certainly makes it a heck of a lot more fun.
The book you should get, Conquering Life's Stage Frights, which is really important. Which in my days growing up, another way to express that was red light syndrome. And that would be the
oh yeah,
that would be the kiss of death if you were in the studio situation. So you need, conquering red light syndrome is when you're in the studio and they're recording, the red light goes on, and that's the same. That's stage fright, right? That same idea.
Yeah, and again, one of my big antidotes for stage fright is if I have like deleterious fright, deleterious fear, overwhelming fear, so to speak. Who am I thinking about? Myself. Who should I be thinking about? You. If I'm recording with you or I'm playing a live gig with you, whether it's the band or the audience, I direct my energy back out to you. I take it out of myself. It gets rid of the red light syndrome, because the red light syndrome happens when you're so self-absorbed and so self-focused. When you stop and go, wait a minute, I want to be in touch with everybody else. I want to think about the music. I want to think about the lyrics. I want to think about how I can make the bass player feel more groove and how I can make everybody else more comfortable. How cool of an experience can I create for other people as opposed to myself? And it's such an easy way. I laugh. Like if I start to get super nervous, I stop and I laugh at myself. I literally will laugh out loud and go, who the hell are you thinking of, you selfish son of a bitch? And then I take a look at the audience and I peek out in front and I look in their eyes. They go, I'm here for you. I'm going to put this energy out to you instead of being so self-absorbed that it takes up all that I'm putting the energy into myself.
I asked a question recently to Abe Laboriel Sr. in a group roundtable we had, like what's the message he would have?
What a lovely player.
Oh,
and you
God.
could see his smile. You could see how he emits it for everybody else. I've seen him so many times.
No question.
And I played on some stuff with him, and he's just so lovely because he's so present for you,
I said, what would you have to say to young drummers out there? And he said, as a musician, we are professional listeners. And that's the key, and that's exactly what you're saying. You remove yourself, and you're so right about the red light syndrome, scenario, because if you're worried about how you're going to be doing what you're doing, I've never thought about it so simply. You're absolutely cutting off your communication or the fact that you're listening to the other people. See how you can communicate what you can do. Yeah. So simple, but so important. Like so many life's lessons, I guess, and drumming lessons too.
Yeah, of course.
So
of course.
Your younger days, the importance of taking lessons, education, upper education. How would you encourage young drummers out there? And most importantly, an amazing thing about your career, because as much as in the drumming community, you're known as being a great drummer, in the other avenues that you pursue, producing and being a composer and an engineer, you also excel in those. For young drummers today, that should all be encompassed as part of their business model, if you will. They have to branch out and be able to do a little bit of everything. How would you encourage them to do that?
Well, I think the more you know, the more opportunities you're creating for yourself. I actually put out a DVD way back in 2009 called A Day in the Recording Studio, when I realized that the world of drummers being recorded in big studios is basically gone. Everybody's got a home studio. We all just throw tracks back and forth. I got tracks from all over the world to play on. And even when I'm playing with other musicians, we're all kind of recording on our own. Sometimes we get the privilege of recording together. So I put out that DVD because that was soup to nuts, everything I could possibly put in about 2 hours and 15 minutes about how I approach listening to a song, how I chart. I talk about all the components of engineering and how I choose the mics I've chosen and the basic understanding of signal path and the importance of being able to record your own drums as part of the business model that is the current business model. So you can download it on Hudson. I think it's $10. It's called a Day in the Recording Studio. And that explains my approach to engineering, to sessions, to how I chart, to how I approach listening. Again, I stick as much as I can into it because I could spend 2 hours talking about that right now. That enables you to be self-sufficient. And that is the industry now. Record your own drums, and you can do it very, very simply without even spending a lot of money. And I remember I used to do drumming recording seminars. And a few years later, the student that I had came to one that I was doing, I was doing a drum clinic in San Diego. And he said, I took your drumming recording seminar a couple of years ago. I remembered him. He said, and I think it was like April or May, he said, I've already played on 100 tracks for people. And after I got done slapping him because I was jealous, no, just kidding. I said, that's fantastic. He said, yeah. I just put an ad out, started really marketing myself. I took all your advice, put together a little studio, and now I'm just playing on all these tracks for people. Again, you set that intention. You say, someone's got to play on these tracks. Might as well be me. And branding and marketing is very, very important. How you brand and market yourself as a player. I never stood still. Back in the day, I was calling everybody I know. Every time I get off the road, I'd call everybody I know. I'm back in town. I could do sessions. I'd call every producer, every bass player, every guitar player, every engineer, just reminding them I exist. I used to do a thing when I would do drum clinics. I'd tell everybody, I said, repeat after me, I exist. And everybody would say, I exist, because we forget. People aren't going to find you. You need to find them. You need to let people know you're available. You need to be tenacious. You don't have to be in your own way, but just make sure that you are in the mix. Make sure that you are communicating constantly about your availability. It's critical.
You mentioned charts, and it's important for young drummers to know. I get a lot of questions here on Drum Channel that, is it important to learn how to read music?
Well, here's the thing. Is it important to know how to read a book?
Good. That's a very good answer. I've never given that one.
That's how we communicate. So if someone says I don't need to read music, well, that's fine. You don't necessarily need to read music, but it's like not being able to read a book. That means you need to be able to hear everything or get oral translation of everything and not be able to actually get it on paper. So the better you can read and the more you understand about reading, and I even make my own style of charts. I know Greg Bissonette is a dear friend of mine. Greg makes the same style charts. We make these, they're like roadmap charts.
Cheat sheets.
So for drummers, yeah, like cheat sheets, right? I know that Kenny Aronoff is also a great friend. Kenny writes out everything. I don't know how he does it so quickly. He's amazing. But he'll sit down and listen to it and write full charts. I just write roadmap charts. And again, if you go check out the Day in the Recording Studio, you can see how I do it. It's just basically form-based charts. And I know that Nashville has its own system of charts. It's based on chord progressions. So there are a lot of ways to be able to read. It's just that unless you're Buddy Rich, who apparently had a photographic memory, you can hear something once and you could play it. I personally don't have a photographic memory. Do you, Don?
No. What did you say? Obviously I don't.
Exactly. That's why we need to be able to read. That's the reason to read. It's so simple.
Yeah, I think not only as a skill set every musician needs to learn, but we also definitely purport going back to Freddie Gruber, which was all about how you play, using your body kind of as the instrument. You got to have your mind teach your hands, because your hands aren't playing. Your mind is telling what your hands to do, and they're going to be producing the sound. Then it's what you play, and then it's why you play it, which, you play so musically. There's so much of YouTube, it's so chops oriented and has been for some time. And the young drummers are watching drummers play and copying what they're doing without really understanding why they're doing it. Do you understand? Does that make sense? I mean,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the way that I look at it, it finally occurred to me at some point that every single note I play matters. Every single note has purpose. And if you treat every single note with purpose, that's your why. Why do I do it? Because every single note matters and every single note has purpose. That's my why. And that's how I play. So I pay attention to every little thing, because when I was a younger drummer, I had lots of chops and I was just playing a lot of chops all the time. I wasn't really paying attention to the purpose, to the why, the reason why I was doing it. I was doing it for myself as opposed to the music. It gets back to what Abe Sr. said. He said, listen. It's all about listening. If you really listen to the music, Stevie Nicks told me, listen to my lyrics. Listen to my lyrics. If you listen to the lyrics of a song, you'll play differently because you start responding musically, you start responding emotionally. Music is emotion. It's an emotional expression. So you need to listen to, or you get to listen to, every component of the music. And the more you listen, the more you realize every note you play matters and every note you play has absolute purpose. And the chops are wonderful and really appropriate. Look, I watch tons of great players with tons of chops. I love it too. I sit in my bed at night and watch TikTok and watch all the crazy stuff. And then I need to think to myself, well, how would this drummer play in a song? How are they going to play a groove? As long as they can play the groove and as long as they're listening to everybody else, when it's your time to solo, man, go crazy, go nuts, use every chop you've got. Express yourself. I think it's great. Just know the difference. That's all.
Al Blaine, you reminded me of thinking of attitude. I'd asked him at one point, what's the most difficult thing when you're going in to do a studio date? And of course, you know Hal, his comment was finding a parking spot. So it's just like whatever was going to go on.
Because he loved what he did.
He did.
Hal made everybody laugh. Hal was joyful. Hal brought joy in. He brought fun in. He made it easy. He made it light. If you're that person, wow, people love you. They want to be with you. They want to play with you.
He also gave the same answer you did, which was so important, and wasn't the expected answer I thought from him. And talking to him about being in the studio. You're there for the first time. You're sitting down. You're getting ready to play a song. What did you want to know about it? And his comment was the lyrics. And I had so many comments from people on Drum Channel just saying, wow, it's the last thing I thought as a drummer. What's the groove? What's the tempo? What's the feel? What's the time? And Hal just said, no, the lyrics. And you're so right. That does. How explain further how the lyrics in seeing a song, one of Stevie's or what Hal is explaining, how that would affect the way you're approaching it. The number of fills, the time feel, or how would you think
Well, first of all, very, very importantly, I had found that if I'm playing a song that doesn't have lyrics, then I might play a fill where I shouldn't be playing a fill. I might do an emphasis or an accent where I shouldn't be doing it. Because if you're listening to the lyrics and you're listening to not only the lyrics themselves, but the phrasing of the vocalist, you're going to approach what you play differently because it's based on the phrasing. It's like you're responding to any other instrument. You're responding to the bass player. You're responding to the keyboard player, the guitar player. If you are listening and you're responding, as opposed to reacting, you're responding, you are present, then it does affect what you do. And if you're moved by the lyrics and there's something that's powerful to you, oh my gosh, you may become more sensitive. You may approach something so differently. It's like a conversation you have. If you and I are in an emotional conversation, we're going to respond very differently to what each other says, unless we're just talking at each other and not really listening. And when you're in a great relationship with your mate, it's the same thing. You respond. You're really listening. You're really present. You're really mindful. That's the whole concept of mindfulness, is being really in that moment. So you're responding in that moment. You can eat mindfully. So you're tasting every bite of food, every bit of texture, every bit of seasoning. It's like when you're really mindful, when you play, you're really present, and you're not just bashing, and you're not just trying to, barf out every lick you've got. You're actually present, and you're really listening to the music. And the greatest musicians, that's what they do. And by the way, I want to thank you so much for all the wonderful compliments you've given me. I mean, I'll just say thank you, thank you, thank you. But you said some really wonderful things that I didn't let go. I just wanted to so much respond to everything you're saying and give the listeners as much information as I can possibly give. So, but I do thank you. I'm really grateful for everything you said
No, so
about me
so
and,
well deserved, and
my diversity.
so very well deserved, and so natural to say, And I don't know why this went through my mind when you were talking about eating and kind of orchestrating what you eat, but having gone to dinners and lunches with Freddie Gruber back in the day, there was nobody that took longer to eat a meal in his life or orchestrated on his plate as much as Freddie did, and it's kind of part of his scientific mind, and also something that I think ties in very much to what you're saying. On many occasions, he would come over and put 2 fingers under my arm and say, "It's not relaxed. You're not feeling the weight." Being relaxed when you play, in addition to having passion and patience and attitude, we often talk about 3 P's here. Passion, patience, and perseverance are really keys. Just looking at online lessons isn't the trick. If you're really going to practice them and get into it, that's what's going to really, affect and change your life. But being relaxed, how important is that?
It really is. Changes the sound of everything. I'll never forget, I hadn't studied with Freddie for a few years, and I went back and I was practicing on the practice pad. He was in the other room, and he said, "I can hear that you don't have any, you're grabbing the sticks too tightly. I could hear it in the sound of the practice pad, because I didn't have an acoustic chamber I wasn't holding the sticks with enough acoustic chamber. I wasn't relaxed enough. I was pulling too tightly." And he could hear it in the sound of the practice pad from the other room. So it changed the sound of the frickin' practice pad. If it changes the sound of the practice pad, how's that going to change the sound of the snare drum or the cymbal or the tom-tom? I always tell my students, pull the sound out of the drums. Don't push the sound in, pull the sound out, which means you need to be relaxed, which means you need to release. With every moment that you strike, there's a release, there's a strike, there's a release, strike, there's a release. And I studied with Bruce Becker, and Bruce is just so amazing in taking what Freddie had taught him and then expanding upon it, taking it to another level. And it is all about pulling the sound out of the drums. And the technique is so important because that relaxation is not only what saves your body. I mean, I'm old enough, man, I got to really pay attention to the way I play. And I still play really big. I still play with a lot of veracity and velocity. It's just, I'm pulling the sound out so I'm relaxed. The only way that you can play big and the only way that you could truly play and pull this sound and pull that beautiful tone and get more volume, get more projection is to be relaxed. Because if you're tight and you're tense, you're pushing as opposed to pulling and being open, right?
Perfect. Absolutely 100%. Something I'll get your opinion on, and I think you'll enjoy too, that I'm in the middle of doing. Talk about bucket lists as you get older. I think we all have our bucket list, things you just don't get to because life takes you in other directions. But one of them was taking all the notes that Freddie put in the book when I was studying with him. It's pretty interesting because I was about his first student when he came out here. We can go on and on about Freddie Gruber. There's a great show, I'll send you a link to it, that we have on Drum Channel, where I interviewed Freddie and we were watching Buddy Rich play. And I brought out of Freddie, I asked him a lot of questions I knew the answer to because we'd gone through this for years, but I posed questions to him about what is he doing there? What is he doing there? Look how he's doing that. Because he was, I think, the only person that I've ever met in my life who had a good analysis of the way Buddy utilized his body in order to play. You were playing on a pad at Freddie's. So I talked to some young drummers and they don't own a practice pad. Getting your practice, building the machine, as Freddie used to call it, is really important. And that's what's missing in a lot of drummers, I think. And you built your technique from lessons at an early age. What was your experience getting into drumming at an early age?
Well, drums chose me. I was very fortunate in the sense that I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan when I was probably 2.5. And I saw John Paul George, and then I saw Ringo, and something resonated. I just remember back then just being so excited, just being this little kid. Then I saw the Screaming Girls. I'm like, ah, I want that. Then I wanted drums, and my mom's like, drums are too loud. Can't you play a nice instrument like your brother Randy? He plays violin. So I started playing cello. But at 5 years old, I sat at a drum set I could play. I wasn't a prodigy, but I could play. I just kind of knew what to do. It chose me, you know? I mean,
I think you were very good at cello, actually, if I recall.
I was okay, cello. I was
Okay.
never very good. Let's not take it that far. But drums was really it for me. Then at 9 years old, they couldn't deny my passion. They bought me a drum set, and I played in bands, and I was studying with Mel Zelnick. I studied with Henry Belson, Louis' brother.
That's where I met Freddie, was through the Music Stop, which was
through Mel Zelnick.
Terry Gibbs' store with Mel Zelnick. Yeah.
Yeah. So I always was taking some, lessons of some sort, and I was always playing in a band. So I always had a chance to be a musician as opposed to just being a drummer sitting and playing all these chops. Because when you play with a band, you learn very, very quickly you can't just play all your chops. You're going to get kicked out of the band. So I think that's one of the most valuable life lessons that I learned from a very early age. I started playing in a band when I was 9. When I got the drums, I started playing with a guitar player and a bass player. Then by the time I was 12, I did my first professional gig. Then I was playing every weekend, playing when my friends were working at pizza places or whatever. I was playing bar mitzvahs, weddings, school dances, whatever. I was playing in bands. So I was always with other musicians, and I learned so much about musicality. And that's how I got into engineering and producing, was because I started engineering and producing my own bands. Because I had had the experience of playing in bands for so long. So I can't stress enough how important it is to always be in that band environment. It's one of the reasons why I like that even the School of Rock concept, because every kid is always playing in a band. And I think it's so important.
It just
You can never get the musicality by playing by yourself. You could sit in your garage or sit in your bedroom for years and years and have all the chops in the world. And it's like learning how to drive online. You could learn how to drive. You could play every video game. You sit get in a car, and then you actually need to drive. Whole other experience. Hold on,
I guess I never thought of this before, but the analogy could be, if you're sitting in a room by yourself, talking to yourself, is that more fun than sitting in a room talking to a whole bunch of people? Because musically, you're having a conversation if you're with a band. And all kinds of things that are not healthy come out of just sitting there in a room talking to yourself all day long. The experience of being able to do that is certainly important. And your new book is, and tell me a little about that.
Well, the new book's going to be called The Attitude Equation, and it's based on the power of attitude. A times B equals C, attitude times behavior equals consequence. We just go a lot deeper, but the fun thing about that book, in the first book, I interviewed a lot of people, but I just put in snippets of the interview. In this book is not necessarily, it's not for drummers per se, it's for everybody. So I interviewed everybody from Judd Apatow, the great writer, producer, director, to Howie Mandel, to a bunch of corporate people, and really like Tony Hsieh, the late great CEO of that online retailer Zappos, to Tiffany Bova, who's one of the greatest female business people and great thinkers, to Grant Cardone, the amazing marketing and money magnate. I interviewed all these people on the power of their attitude and asked them to demonstrate and give me examples as to ideas and stories and times when their attitude really did shape their behaviors, and critical times in their life where they had an attitude pivot or an attitude failure or an attitude success that determined what happened next, that determined that next behavior that brought them to that consequence. So this book is really fun because I have a bunch of interviews with really great people from all walks of life, musicians too, of course. So it is not released yet.
That was my next question.
we're negotiating a publishing deal right now. We're trying to figure out which publisher to go with, or to even potentially self-publish. Because the publishing industry, like the music industry, is very different now. So we're trying to figure that out. I co-wrote it with the mentor of my life, Dr. Jim Samuels, who's one of the greatest thinkers on the planet. And A times B equals C is actually his concept. So I'm actually just the conduit and the voice for a lot of his concepts. It's just the way that I position it. And when I either do a drum clinic, or in this case now I'm really speaking full time and I talk to big corporate audiences, I still play drums. I still tell road stories. I just do it with a little bit more corporate content, but it's still the same stuff. Like as a speaker, I'm essentially doing a glorified drum clinic. I did 1,000 drum clinics. I took that formula. I thought, and it was Dom Famularo that first told me about doing corporate gigs, so to speak. So Dom was kind of my mentor when it came to even getting into speaking. And now Rich Redmond's doing it. Kenny Aronoff's doing it. Sandy Gennaro's doing it. There are a lot of drummers that are getting into, doing this corporate speaking gig. So it's a lot of fun. It's a great way. I think a lot of drummers tend to be great band leaders. Drummers tend to be great communicators. I think drummers are so community oriented, and drummers are so selfless, like we're always willing to give. You can ask a drummer to show you a lick. They're like, sure, come on over, man. I'll show you a lick. I'll never forget. I called one of the great drummers. I'm not going to say who it is, but I called him. I said, man, can I come over? Can you just show me some stuff? He said, sure, come on over, man. I'll cook you dinner. I said, really? That's incredible. He said, as a matter of fact, come on over. At the time I was single. He said, I'll have my girlfriend there. She's got this really beautiful girl. I introduced you to her best friend. I said, yeah, man, are you kidding me? Drummers is so giving. He goes, and if you don't like my girlfriend's best friend, hey, just take my girlfriend. It's fine. Of course.
I can have a vision.
True.
I won't guess, but I could give you a pretty good guess.
Of course that's not true. Drummers, giving people. I just love to tell that story.
No, and the truth of that story is the instrument is so complex and it's so personal to each individual person. Jim Keltner once said in a group we had here, I was a round table with Neil Peart and Don Perry, when at the end of it he just turned to them and said, look, I'm never going to play the way you do, and you're not going to play the way I do, and that's the beauty of being a drummer. So it kind of ties into attitude. You don't have to think about.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
If you had 10 drummers, if you had 10 of the greatest drummers down to some just sort of non-professional drummers, all sit down and play. Not one of them would sound exactly like the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we all have minute differences in the varying milliseconds between our different limbs. The way your bass drum strikes relative to where your snare drum strikes, relative to the way your slight different approach with your technique, the sound you get out of the drum because of that technique. There's such minute differences. That's what's the beauty of music. That's the beauty of bands. That's why you get like Led Zeppelin, and that John Bonham was kind of known for sort of being on the backside, playing on the backside of the beat. Well, that's because John Paul Jones, the bass player, is playing in the middle, and Jimmy Page would always play a little on top. So that's what kind of gave Zeppelin that feel. Then you look at the Police, it was almost just the opposite. Copeland would be pushing it a little bit, and then you'd have Sting sort of laying back a little bit, and Andy Summers kind of pulling behind, and that gave the Police their sound and their feel. It's just so beautiful. It's so organic. You get a group of players together. You go, no four players are ever going to sound like any other four players. And you take one player out of that band. You take Charlie Watts out of the Rolling Stones. I mean, now, of course, you have Steve Jordan.
Steve Jordan.
But, when I was a kid, I was such a snob. I used to say, Charlie Watts can't play. And then I started to think, and I thought, well, man, I'm such a huge Dave Weckl fan, but what would happen if you put Dave Weckl in the Rolling Stones? No way, dude. This is no way. People always criticize Ringo. Ringo to me is like my hero. John Lennon was asked, who's do you think Ringo's the best drummer in the world? And he's like, Ringo's not even the best drummer in the Beatles, It's a funny thing. But it was the synergy of these four musicians. It's the synergy of the band members that just make gold. You know,
Greg Bissonette told a great story. He plays with Ringo in his all-star band, of course.
Oh yeah.
And he said he was in a practice room before they were to go on, and he was warming up on a pad. And Ringo walked by and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm just warming up." He says, "Well, why would you do that? You're not playing with a band." It's like, no reason to be doing that, Greg.
Right,
You're not playing with a band. Why would you be playing? Why are you playing drums? You know.
Yeah, right. It's so beautiful, but you know that's the way he thought, because they just played so many hours together.
Yeah.
And they just played and played and played and played and played. They were attached.
And you're bringing up something so important that we could talk about at length on another time, but just the idea of playing together in a band and how you're not just listening to each other or listening to the lyrics, but where you're placing that time, the time feel, how you're locking yourself together as a drummer, how you're locking in with the bass player. Reminded me of Greg Matheson told a story with Jeff Porcaro where they were in a session together, and Jeff was pulling back, so Greg pulled back because he thought that's where the feel was. And after the track, Jeff went up to Greg and said, "Greg, never do that." He said, "You're supposed to stay right on it when I'm pulled back. That's how we create this stress and release. Don't go with me."
Yeah.
But the fact that they're subtly thinking about that, the little nuances. You know, Chad Smith, we told the story, there's 40 people that audition for the Chili Peppers. And he has a couple of lessons on Drum Channel, a couple of courses actually, they're really good. And one is Basic Rock Drumming Chad's Way, which is playing your first couple of rock beats, which anybody could learn. But I added the Chad's Way because it's basic rock drumming. Great, just start playing a rock beat. I don't care how good you are at it. But then Chad's Way is, how come he got chosen to get the gig over the other 40 people? So what I started doing was he was playing the beat, and I started taking the drums away one at a time. So he was just left with nothing but a pair of sticks, and I finally took those away. When you looked at his body motion, it like told a whole story of where the time feel was coming from, whether there was a drum set there in his way or not. But it's so much is...
That's great. I love that story, man. I love that.
Of who we are and how we present that. And you're such an inspiration, I think, for young drummers to look at not only how you play as a drummer, your life's mission, the fact that you're expanding your horizons not only beyond giving a drum lesson, but how you're going to be able to affect a drummer's life by giving them a life lesson. And that's really unique. And I think I congratulate you for doing that. I think it's not only amazing, but it's so needed out there today. I think it's fantastic. And how can people get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me. Just go right to markschulman.com, and you can email me directly at mark@markschulman.com. If you could spell Schulman, then you can get it. Schulman's got a C in it, by the way.
Yeah, S-C-H, by the way, yes.
SCHULMAN. So yeah, I'm open to communication. So you want to communicate with me directly, feel free. I will return your email. It might take me a few weeks, but I will, I promise.
And whatever company you might be working at out there, you have day gigs, I know, a lot of you. Go to your boss and say, hey, let's have a gathering where we have a motivational speaker, and you know who you should recommend to do that. You get a lot of fun stories. And here's some drumming too, so it can't go wrong there, right?
Oh, heck yeah. Heck yeah. We have fun. Thanks for the plug, Don.
No, listen, I look forward to getting together in person whenever we can. Thank you for taking time to join me today so much. I really appreciate it.
I love you, Don. I've known you for so many years. You're a great man. You do wonderful things for people, and I truly believe you're here to be of service. You not only created some of the greatest drums on the planet, but with Drum Channel and everything you've been and everything you've offered up for us, I'm grateful for you, my friend. I think everybody is.
Thank you so much.
So thank you.
Let's brainstorm some fun things I've got in the back of my mind for coming up for this year too.
Let's do it, my friend. Let's do it. I'm here.
We'll do a virtual handshake here.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go. See you next time. We'll see you next time here on Drum Channel.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers.